All right, well, welcome back to another edition of the Man Cave Classroom. I'm John Heeg, and today we're going to be analyzing this political cartoon from the Industrial Revolution. So let's just start blank. I mean, I know there's some things that are popping out to you where you're like, okay, I think I know what's going on in this cartoon. But let's just start here, really simple, with just some observations. So I'm going to start from the back, and right over here, it looks like I have a building. Should be familiar if you're a social studies student. And on that building, right over here, if you take a really good look, when we zoom in here, it says Standard Oil. Okay, so now we're starting to put some pieces together. Now, of course, we have all this black soot and smoke in the background here, along with it looks like a lake of some sort or a pond in front of it that you also it seems to be black as well. And when we're looking at literature or we're looking in terms of political cartoons, black is not always usually a flattering color. Sometimes it often represents maybe the bad guy or the antagonist if you're looking in stories. Now, if we work our way towards the foreground now, one of the probably the first things that catches your eye is this hand. And in this hand, you have this building, right? And you notice, hopefully by now, this should be familiar to you. You see these columns that are on the front, usually one of those identifying features and marks that this is in fact the White House, and it happens to say White House right over there. And we have some people involved, and I see some money bags. Now, moving along, all right, I have the Treasury Department right over here, and then of course this big dominating person has a little bit of rather a sinister look on his face, and it looks like over here, um, we have I don't know what you would call this, but this is something that jewelers actually use to kind of zoom in and look at something that's really, really small. So even though I'm what this device is escaping me at the moment, its purpose is to do this, is to look at things that are really small in their hand or on a table, and that's going to become important for what we're talking about right over here. Hopefully by now, if you were able to make some connections right here, this is John D. Rockefeller. Standard Oil, when I mentioned that before, hopefully that came to mind and you were able to figure out that this is actually John D. Rockefeller. And this political cartoon has everything to do with Standard Oil. Now, when we get into some historical context, then, if I go back here and now I'm looking at, perhaps the smog, and it looks like we have some factory pipes in the background. Usually what helps for me is that when people see this, is that they're right away thinking of the Industrial Revolution. And that's right around the time period we're talking about here. We're talking about the late 1800s. And if we think about in terms of historical context, what is going on, we can think about big businesses. We can think about big businesses having a lot of control, a lot of influence in government. We know that. The other thing we know is that government had a rather laissez-faire approach to big business. And what that meant was that business was going well. In certain instances, the economy is doing well. So business had a hands-off approach to businesses. They didn't regulate or control or legislate or enforce a lot of rules and laws when it came to big businesses, which there are pros and cons to that. If we're looking at Standard Oil, it did create a better quality of life for their workers. However, what this cartoonist is trying to get to is that when you're looking at big business, particularly with John D. Rockefeller, these big businesses did get kind of out of control. And that's why we're looking at these buildings right over here, and we see the White House over here. And you're getting the idea here that big businesses, and in this cartoon, particularly John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil, had a lot of power in government. Now, when we look at government and what its purpose is, its purpose is not to serve or not to be in the palm of big business's hand. The people who work in government get their jobs because the general public or the population elect them. So they work for the people. Now, what we see happening in this cartoon is that we start to see that, well, with John D. Rockefeller, he has a lot of influence in government. When we're looking at the White House and you're looking at the Capitol, and of course, the Capitol is generally involved in creating laws. Now, why is it that Rockefeller has a lot of power? Well, and influence in government. Well, when we look at the power and influence in government, when it comes to his rise to the top, he's put a lot of small businesses out of business by lowering prices on Standard Oil. Again, Standard Oil and oil in general is just going to be needed for a variety of things, but in particular, people are going to need it to put into lanterns to light their homes. So that's why there's going to be such a demand for it. It's going to be almost a need for the American people, and he's going to uh, provide that oil that's going to be needed in homes. The other thing that he has done, if we think back to other ways that he's limited competition, is that he winds up getting big companies like the railroad industry to ship his product and provide for him a rebate. So one of the things that should possibly come to mind is, another familiar political cartoon where we have farmers who are really upset with the trains, and that's because the farmers who would love to get a rebate are not, because big businesses such as Standard Oil are getting a rebate from the people, from these railroad companies to ship all of their oil. So when we look at this cartoon, just other couple of things that we're looking at and we're breaking down. Political cartoons do often sometimes have a bias, and this is also another way for the cartoonists themselves to kind of put their opinion in it. If we're looking at this cartoon, the political cartoonist themselves doesn't really have a favorable opinion of John D. Rockefeller. A lot of cartoons don't paint John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil in a flattering way. If you look here, the Standard Oil, when we're looking at Rockefeller over here, they seem to be dominating this particular cartoon where the size is going to be important to show that he has power. The other thing that they show him that he has power is that he has the White House right over here again in the palm of his hand. The Capitol seems to be overrun by Standard Oil. And again, we look at Rockefeller seems to have all of this control in this particular political cartoon. All right. Well, thanks for watching. Hopefully, you were able to get a little bit more of an understanding of this political cartoon. We've covered some of the historical context in this. We talked about the bias that is obviously visible in this political cartoon. And, again, we reinforced the influence and power that Rockefeller had during this particular time period.